You'll have heard from my colleague Noreen this morning, the director of the network, someone who I've found eternally inspiring when it comes to all things co-production. And what I'm going to be talking about for the next 25 minutes or so with you really builds upon those things Noreen would have shared earlier and translates those broad values of co-production into some of the practical considerations we can take forward in our own work. We're going to start by reflecting on something called the spectrum of interactions, on the difference between doing things to people, doing things for people, and doing things with people. Then we'll unpack all the different ways in which co-production can manifest in practice in our work. And finally, it'll be over to you for a reflection on some of the ways in which co-production projects actually unfold in the real world, for better, for worse. And we'll think about where our own practice lives and how we can make it even better in the future. So I'll start just by, if I may, sharing my slides. I think one of the hosts or co-hosts may just have to allow me to do that. And you have.
Sorry, should be there now.
Perfect. And so up on the screen here, you can see what's known as the ladder of participation. Sherry Arnstein's ladder of participation, which shows the relationship between non-participation, those things which Arnstein called manipulation and therapy, and in our modern day vocabulary, educating and coercing might live there too, through to tokenism, work which may inform or consult or placate, and right through to meaningful citizen power at the top of our ladder, where we work in partnership, where we delegate power, where we see real evidence of citizen control. Over on the right of the screen, again, in that sort of modern day language, I suppose you would say, that's what the realm of co-production, co-design, involvement in the language of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. This can be a great framework for helping us think about the ways in which we can involve people with an increasing degree of meaningfulness, with an increasing degree of co-production, increasingly sharing that power and responsibility with all of those who we serve and who we support. The weakness of a ladder, of course, is that there's a subtle implication that the stuff at the bottom is bad and that the stuff on the top is good. And what we find is a helpful way to think about this as the co-production network for Wales is not a spectrum from bad to good, but simply a spectrum from different to different. And so moving from a ladder of participation through to a spectrum of interaction, which should be up on the screen for you there now. I'm always minded to think of things in quite simplistic terms. And for me, the most helpful way to frame co-production is about the transition from doing things to or for people to doing things with people. And there's good reason to do things to and for people as well. If I'm rushed into hospital and I need CPR, that's not the time for co-production. That's when I need something doing to me. It's about coercion, it's about protection, it's about that emergency critical response. My local authority, my public service provider, they collect my bins every Friday. I'm very happy for them to do that for me, extremely grateful. My responsibility is to organise the recycling, their responsibility is to take it away. It's a relationship that works well for all parties. And I'm simply happy to be informed about when they're coming, what I need to do, and knowing that my waste is being looked after responsibly. But there are many more occasions where we should be doing things with people. And doing things with people is the realm of co-production. It's the realm of partnership working, real collaboration with citizens. It's where the involvement principle of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act comes to life. It's about there being nothing about us without us. And it's about making sure that the inherent value of every person in our communities is identified and respected. And all those who want to be involved in decision-making, which is going to impact upon their lives, are given real ways to be involved in that decision-making. Now, I would argue, whilst this is a spectrum where there is the place for all three of these things in our public life, doing with is the missed opportunity most of the time. What I would say is that we should really make doing with the default, the rule, not the exception. Rather than saying, well, we usually do things to and for people, but are there any opportunities for us to do a few things with people? We should start by saying, We should do everything with everyone. And where are the exceptions where actually we should do things 2 or 4 people instead? If we turn our thinking on its head, then we are far less likely to miss an opportunity to respect somebody's inherent value, to involve them meaningfully in decision-making, and to co-produce together. And before I go on, Liz, do you want to comment or ask me something there?
Only quickly, exactly as you said with regards to with, you said about the bins. If a person can't actually physically put the bins out, we automatically assume people are all putting their bins out. If somebody physically can't, then there's that gap where we should be working with. And, you know,
it's a great example, Liz.
Yeah.
A great example. So I've given that general example. You've dug deeper. And so this is exactly where doing with adds value. And it's a great example of why it should be the rule, not the exception. Because if our rule is to do things 2 and 4 people, then we may have broad, sweeping services that assume that they are delivering equality for all, but actually they're not delivering that true equity because they don't reflect the nuance of the way in which people need to engage with those services. If we're doing things with people, sorry, Margaret.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you there, Mike. I don't mean that was a great question, but can we possibly leave questions till Mike's finished speaking, because we are very tight on time and we are going to hopefully have a time to interact towards the end of this session.
Yeah, sure. Right? And if people are having those thoughts as I'm talking, pop them into the chat as well, and then we can pick them all up at the end. But it goes right to the heart of why doing with is so important, because it allows us to have those conversations, understand that nuance, capture those unknown unknowns, learn together, and enhance our services as a direct result. You remind me actually, Liz, of a real example of a project that took place in South Wales, where some people, and I'm paraphrasing this, but people who had some learning difficulties were struggling to follow the guidance they'd been given on recycling, and actually by working with those communities, more accessible, more impactful, more supportive guidance and support was made available, which allowed those people to then be empowered to better look after those things and improve the service as a direct result. Now, to just zone in a little bit on what we've got under doing with here, we can see co-production as that headline, but underneath co-production, it unpacks into all of those different flavors and all of those different elements. Co-commissioning, co-design, co-delivering, co-evaluating. The key point here is that no matter who you are, no matter what your position is within your organization, no matter which part of the process you're currently working on, there will be scope for co-production. There will be something within your power to help you share that power and responsibility with others, to help do more things with people and to enhance our services as a result. Maybe because it's lunchtime, but I'm going to use a food analogy here. And one really crude way we could think about it is by thinking about baking a cake. Where's the opportunity for co-production in baking a cake? Well, at the beginning, it's right in the shopping list. It's our co-commissioning. I could do that for you. I could just go to Tesco, buy what I think should be in the cake. Or I could say, what type of cake shall we bake? What flavors do people like? What sort of products should I buy? Should it be dairy-free? Should it be gluten-free? Should it be a chocolate cake? Should it be a sponge cake? That's what co-commissioning is about, making sure that we all have a say in those ingredients and those central premises which are going to have a downstream impact on our ultimate experience. When it comes to activity, well, that's 2 things. That's going to the shop. You might want me to go and do the shopping for you, but you might really enjoy coming to the shop. It might be a positive experience. It might help you make better choices. And it's baking the cake. It's about whether you want me to crack the eggs and stir the flour and stick it in the oven, or whether we'll have an enriched experience by working out how to bake that cake together, learning together, building relationships in the process, figuring out the type of cake we want through the act of baking it. When it comes to co-delivery, that's the output of eating the cake itself. And again, there's lots of ways we could do that. I could do it to you. I could slice up the cake into those equal squares, put them on the little party trays and hand them out. Or I could say, do you want a big slice or a small slice? Do you want a corner piece with thick icing or a little slither with hardly any icing on at all? you could have lots of influence over how you actually experience that delivery. I could hand out the cake for you, or you could pass it to your friends, and we could have a completely different experience through our co-delivery of eating our cake too. And what about the evaluation? Well, I could look for some narrow KPIs of whether my cake baking exercise had worked. Is there any left? If not, everyone must have enjoyed it. But could that miss any important detail? What if you didn't want to hurt my feelings, so you scooped it into the bin when I wasn't looking? What if you didn't eat it, but only because you thought it looked so good, you wanted to save it to share with your friends when you got home later? If we co-evaluate, then we can share those stories, share those experiences, capture what it was about the cake baking process that we really enjoyed, and make sure that we can learn from that to do things even better next time. Now, often there can be maybe a presumption for those new to co-production, and it needs to start with co-delivery, or maybe even end with co-delivery. That meeting point of services and people is where the co-production happens. But in practice, the starting point for co-production is often co-design, the blank piece of paper moment where we say, let's come and do this together. And ultimately, once co-production becomes embedded into a culture, established as a way of working, then co-commissioning, co-design, co-delivery, and co-evaluation will all start to congeal, become interconnected, and be one cohesive way of a community doing things with each other consistently together. Now, I wanted to make sure that the whole second half of our half an hour together today was about your thoughts, your feelings, reflecting on your own practice. And I know that co-production often, in theory, is one thing, but making that work in practice can really be quite another. So what I want to do just for our final 15 minutes is reflect on some real examples. These are generalized and anonymized, but based on real things that have happened with real organizations in real communities. Different examples of the ways in which communities have been engaged, for better, for worse. Some examples of doing to, some examples of doing for, some examples of doing with. I'm going to read this out now. And as I'm reading this out, or as you're reading it on the screen, I want you to reflect on what you think we're looking at an example of here. Is this a good example of co-production? Is this doing to, doing for, and doing with? And why? I'll read it out loud, and as I am, share your thoughts and your comments in the chat. Then I'll read through them and share some of them with the whole group. So here's our first example. We have young people who've decided they'd like to turn part of their local youth centre into a coffee shop that they can socialise and relax in. They want to call it Our Space and run it themselves. They are trained up in basic food and safety and in accounting and management skills. They decide opening hours, what food and drink they will serve, and how much to pay staff. Our Space becomes a social enterprise, and it just about breaks even. Providers working in the centre help them identify development opportunities and connect them up with local businesses who might need catering services. The council notices that the venue is very popular with young people and starts to look at ways of using the coffee shop to deliver other areas of provision, such as employment advice, CV skill sessions, and counselling support. Seems like a good project, but what I'd like to see in the chat, and I've got the window open on my screen, is whether you think we're looking at a true co-production case study here, whether this is doing to, doing for, doing with, and if this was your project, how you would do it differently or how you would do it better.